If you're looking for proven ways to take your fundraising results to the next level, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Intentional Fundraiser Podcast, hosted by Tammy Zonker. Tammy has trained and led thousands of nonprofit organizations to collectively raise more than $500 million and is also recognized as one of America's top 20 fundraising experts. This is the podcast where Tammy equips and empowers amazing fundraising pros like you to transform your fundraising so you can transform the world. And now, let's hear from Tammy.
Ken Burnett is an award-winning author, speaker, and consultant specializing in fundraising, marketing, and communications for the nonprofit organizations all around the world. Now semi-retired, his career in the nonprofit sector spans multiple decades, during which time he has made significant contributions to the profession of fundraising. Ken served as the UK Director of Action Aid in the late 70s and as the Director of Fundraising and Communications in the early 80s. In 1983, he founded Burnett Associates, the first company of its kind in Europe, which produced innovative and effective donor-focused communication campaigns for more than 2 decades. He's the author of several influential fundraising books, which you are probably familiar with: Relationship Fundraising, Friends for Life, The Zen of Fundraising, Storytelling Can Change the World, and The Essence of Campaign Fundraising in 52 exhibits and 199 web links. And I must confess, I have every single one of those books.
Oh, wow. Great, Tammy. That's wonderful. And you're also very kind to say multiple decades. I think that's very kind of you. It's actually coming up for nearly 50 years, Tammy, since I must admit I still pinch myself because I still feel I'm 27. But anyway, fundraisers have to be dreamers, don't they? Really?
We are brokers of hope for sure, and dreamers.
Exactly. That's a good
I think
one.
Eternally optimistic. Ken's book, Relationship Fundraising, is considered one of the biggest selling fundraising books of all time. He recently released the 3rd edition of Relationship Fundraising, and he's joining us today to talk about it. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you very much, Tammy. That's a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Oh,
It's
well.
always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And believe me, I had to edit that introduction down because there was so much more to say.
I know,
But
it's kind of fine.
so let's just jump in. My first question is kind of level setting. How do you define relationship fundraising? And how has this concept evolved since the book's original publication? What are the key principles?
Well, the thing that surprised me most when approaching a 3rd edition after 32 years after the original was just how much was not just as relevant today, but in many ways even more relevant. In essence, I think the subtitle that I gave to the 1st edition, relationship fundraising in 1992 was it was a bit of fashionable jargon and, kind of put off by things like that. I chose the title. I felt it was very opposite in the 90s, at the start of the 90s, when people were talking about relationship marketing in other business areas. But I subtitled it A Donor-Based Approach to the Business of Raising Money. And the motivation for that was that I had started out to write how-to book, because at that time there was no good book in Britain on fundraising. There was a number of books from America, some better than others, but I felt there was room for a specifically British book, and I was thinking it would focus mainly on the British market. I started off to write a how-to book and put down the prep. Basically, it was things that I had learned from about 15 years of experience of fundraising then. And I'd been involved in building the charity Action Aid, which was termed the first direct marketed charity in the UK. And, we'd won awards for the work that we'd done. So I thought I had something to say, and I started off writing a how-to book. But as I was going through the building blocks of a good fundraising strategy and approach, I came to realize the book needed to be built around a great big point of view. That was a phrase that my business partner, George Smith, had come up with when he was writing the foreword for the first edition. And the point of view was that actually all the technical changes and advances that there were around that time tended to be more marketing oriented and were often leaving a taste in donors' mouths that wasn't all that productive or helpful. The whole phrase marketing, I mean, I started a marketing agency, as you mentioned in the introduction, Burnett Associates. And yet, in all my nearly 50 years, I've never met a donor who wants to be marketed at, particularly by their favorite charity. And so that big point of view, which was that we should be focusing not on the money, but on the people who were sending it. So in essence, it was very simple. I've often said there's not enough to fill half a page, really, in terms of the essence of my philosophy is that if you're nice to people, they'll be nice to you back. Now, somehow I've managed to do 8 books on the subject, and I don't quite know whether that's a good thing. But I mean, obviously, fundraising is a many-faceted occupation, and it requires a great deal of skills, particularly people skills. But I feel if you start by the notion, which so many fundraising organizations do, that it's about targeting and segmenting and, you know, asking more often, more stridently for more money and then switching to ask for a regular gift or a monthly gift and then trying to upgrade people to be a major donor or to pledge a bequest. But that's the wrong focus. If we focused on delivering for donors what they want, so the paradigm of you give and we get, which is still the paradigm in most fundraising organizations, to be honest. That is not the most productive. If you can actually demonstrate that we can give quite a lot, we can give a great deal in terms of sense of satisfaction, achievement, we can show enormous results, value for money. Actually, I saw a quote today from Marianne Kerr, which was that if you spread joy in other people, that's the best way to get joy yourself. And I just thought, yeah, that sums it up. So these are things that I think we have known for quite a long time. And I don't think I invented relationship fundraising, but I did write it down and I did kind of document it. I think the book has been very well received by fundraisers. I get lots and lots of comments about how it's influenced people in their careers. And that's why I wrote the book. I wrote it because I wanted to encourage fundraisers. I think fundraising is a great job. And I wanted to encourage them to go about it in a particular way that would give them a lot of satisfaction, but also be good for their donors. Overall, I don't think that the donor experience has been sufficiently improved for most donors to actually recognize that there is a difference.
As demonstrated by our horrible retention rate.
I mean, exactly that. And I was beginning at that time in the 1990s to work in America, and I'd come across this phrase of churn and burn, and it was quite gruesome. And the kind of approaches that quite a lot of not just charities and people running the fundraising function in not-for-profit organizations, but also their suppliers, their vendors. Very often the attitude was, quite aggressive, acquisitive, and as you say, the statistics were really depressing. We were getting people to come in and look around, but then they were leaving the store because didn't like what they saw. And so that was really the focus. And to try and say we're in the inspiration business and there should be no pressure in fundraising ever. And, I think those messages went down very well with a lot of people in fundraising organizations. But I have to tell you, Tammy, I think that relationship fundraising still has some way to go to achieve its potential. And I think when it does, we can raise a lot more money. We can keep donors for much longer. We can give them a much better, more fulfilling experience. And in return, I absolutely know, because we have this wonderful donor cause relationship, and so many donors are giving in spite of the fundraiser just as much as they're giving because of the fundraiser, which is a shocking admission. But we can improve this, and the benefits, both for us and for our donors, could be absolutely huge.
Agreed. We're challenged because when we think about all the behind the scenes tactics and mechanisms for generating our asks, for guiding our relationship moves, so to speak, they're very steeped in transaction, right?
Yeah,
We've lost sight of
absolutely.
the humanity of it.
Early in my career, I got a real lesson about this, which I was trying to encourage clients of mine to invite donors to come into the office and to try and make the fundraising office a welcoming place. And I very soon found there were job titles on doors and just couldn't have, the general officer commanding segmentation and targeting in Eastern Europe, or whatever. I mean, I can't remember, but the sense of being a welcoming place, it makes me shudder sometimes. I was lecturing people about keeping their reception area relevant, warm, give people somewhere to sit, for goodness sake. Give them, some nice display of the charity's work to look at rather than, a cold cup of coffee and a long wait, perched on the edge of a photocopying machine, waiting for somebody to come and see. Somewhat exaggerating, but not that much. And, this whole notion of customer service and how we looked, and very often the issue was actually down to thoughtlessness. It looked like a lack of integrity. A very good example of that was the process of saying thank you to donors, which is still terrible. I mean, our sector is not good at saying thank you and welcome and congratulations, well done. But it's not good at, a whole host of things. And this is such a lost opportunity. People used to say to me, oh, thanking is an expensive chore. We don't thank donors who give £10 or less because it's just not worth it. It was an uphill battle to kind of counter some of those things. But then as soon as you spell these things out, people start nodding in agreement. As I say, it's thoughtlessness rather than an absence of integrity, but to the recipient, to the donor, it looks like an absence of it.
And it is definitely challenging because philanthropy teams, development offices are short staffed, typically under resourced. But here's the thing, if you look at the cost of donor attrition, you can
Sure.
quickly justify investments in systems and people that retain donors, that give them that lovely mission focused warm glow from giving.
You're so right that it could be a relatively small investment would take us away from that. But, this is really, in my view, Tammy, it's a crisis of leadership. And it's still in too many organizations. The fundraising function is off to one side, and it's viewed very often by the rest of the organization as a kind of, well, they've got to do better this year than they did last year because, we need more money. Of course, we always need more money, but the short-term thinking behind that kind of attitude, what you put your finger on is classic false economy. And our sector is bedeviled by false economies. And we know that they don't work, that they don't produce happy donors, that donors leave us too often. It costs so much. But if you take just one single thing, in the 90s, the kind of obsession for career fundraisers, who were very much a minority and almost a new breed of people because the old retired army colonels still predominated and they, had a very strange attitudes. But for new career fundraisers, they were just kind of getting into this swing of things. And notions like investing in fundraising, they were not training people properly. I think some of these things have got a lot better, but it's still very patchy. If you were to do a survey of fundraisers and in terms of what they need to know, there would be so many gaps. It is quite alarming that people can be a fundraiser and they still don't need to know the basic essentials of being a fundraiser.
Yeah. Ken, relationship fundraising is considered a classic text. I mean, no one can argue that. It's been in print for 32 years, consistently selling all around the world, and now is, of course, as we said, in its third edition. Why do you say now that essentially relationship fundraising has failed in its main aim?
Yeah, well, I think it's just because of what we're discussing that that issue hasn't gone away. And in fact, it's still patchy. Now, I must stress that there are loads of great fundraising leaders, and I've worked with many of them over the years, and they are absolutely exemplary. But they are still the minority, and still far too many donors don't see that. And still, for too many organizations, the focus is short term, it's on the money coming in. And I mean, a crazy false economy, in my view. You've mentioned the poor retention figures that inhabit our industry, and they are still very poor. And I remember in the first edition of Relationship Fundraising, I made a prediction that in the future, fundraisers would be judged just as much for their retention skills and abilities as they were then for acquisition. And actually, I know this from my own personal career, fundraising was about acquiring donors, and we had advertising agencies who would help us, and we were spending more money acquiring donors than we would ever spend in our lives if it was our own money. And we would target, and we would keep very tight records and cost per reply, and we would launch campaigns and all of that. But there was nothing like the same attention given to keeping our supporters. And everybody knows that it costs a lot less to keep a new supporter than it does to acquire them in the first place. That message still hasn't got through. And there are many like that where we talk about, everybody recognizes now that saying thank you is probably the best opportunity to secure the vital second gift. And that what we want are not responders, people who give in a knee-jerk reaction to an emotional appeal. We want people who have the capacity to continue to support our causes long term. Saying thank you properly, quickly, delight with integrity is one of the best fundraising tools that there is. I road test. I am a donor to several causes, and I check out causes quite often. And I know that lots of others who do it as well. And what we get back nowadays, I would say it's better than it was, but it's not that much better. I would say that the kind of communications, the appeals, donors love to get letters. People love to get letters. A letter from a friend is a delight. People don't like to get mailings, but what do? We send mailings, and we send mailings routinely. And so those kind of things are almost institutionalized in particularly in the larger causes. And I have often heard from individual fundraisers that it's much easier to introduce relationship fundraising in a smaller organization than in a big organization where everything is on kind of established tram lines and you can't really turn the ship around. So I do feel when I was asked to consider doing a third edition 2 years after the second edition, my initial reaction was, I've been there, done that. Do I really want to do it? Two things prompted me differently. One, I was invited to address a conference in Italy, and I had a fantastic time because the Italian fundraisers were so warm and welcoming, and I was signing dog-eared copies of my old book
Yeah.
and thinking, wow, these things still have currency. And then the Polish Fundraisers Association contacted me and said, there's no book in the Polish language for fundraisers. We have secured a grant to translate one book, and we've chosen that one book to be yours. And I was shocked initially, and I said, that was 30 years ago, surely, and they said, no, this is the one we want. But those two things actually did give me a feeling that maybe there was still an interest in updating my book. But the real motivation came from a critical event, which I know, Tammy, that you know well. So many fundraisers in 2024 don't go back as far as 2015. And in 2015 in Britain, we had a media crisis. It was an absolutely horrific story of a 92-year-old woman who had jumped from a bridge to her death, committed suicide. And the reports on the front pages of the national media were that she'd been hounded to death by charities. She was a lifelong charity supporter, and she was getting like 30, 40 appeal mailings every month. And she didn't like to say no. Now, there's always more to these things than first meets the eye, but the media had their focus on bad fundraising practices. And that went on and on for 2 years. And there was a huge response eventually from the fundraising, not from the fundraising profession, actually, but from volunteers who stepped up to defend fundraising. Our actual bodies, our professional associations, proved themselves to be not at all good. That it was not their finest hour by any means. More than 2,000 people volunteered for a thing called the Commission on the Donor Experience to try and define best practices. So if that could happen in 2015, then clearly relationship fundraising had not had the impact and the reach that I had initially hoped for it. And so this third edition, it's a very big book. It's a fairly hefty tome. And as Harvey McKinnon will tell you, it's quite good for holding open doors or, if you've got a wobbly table leg or whatever. So there's a lot in that. And included in it is a call to action to say, we now need to do something to make sure that kind of thing does not happen again. And it could so easy. There are still stories bubbling up in the media about inappropriate fundraising methods. And I think we need to protect ourselves. But more than anything, we have a duty to our donors to reassure them that actually we've learned some lessons over the years and we can do this thing a little bit better. So what I'm asking people to do is to sign up their organization for a covenant with donors, which would not quite be enshrined in the rule of law. One of my sons is a human rights lawyer, and I envy him the precision of his craft, his business, because, the rule of law is basically the fundamental that keeps our society functioning, and hope it will for the decades to come, whatever the politicians do. It's essential that we have something like that to govern how society behaves. I think we need something like that in fundraising, and I'm hoping others will agree with that.
Brilliant, brilliant. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Kindsight builds technology that helps nonprofits make a difference. It was born when 3 leading-edge nonprofit technologies, iWave, Ascend, and Nonprofit OS, came together to better support organizations with purpose-built tools designed to make fundraising easier, faster, and more effective. With a combined 40 years working with nonprofits and other fundraising organizations, we have seen the generosity landscape evolve and change in ways we never could have predicted. It's become clear that the best approach to fundraising is a personalized and meaningful one, a human approach. But that's not easy when goals are high and resources are scarce. That's where Kindsight comes in. With Kindsight, fundraisers can find and qualify potential donors with the world's largest proprietary donor database, engage with those donors quickly and effectively with AI-powered content generation, and keep everything on track with a centralized CRM built specifically for fundraising teams. Connect your story to donors who care about your cause, at any scale, in real time. That's the power of Kindsight.
Ken, what are some of the main insights about relationship fundraising that you share in this new edition, in addition to this call to action around a covenant and, lifting up the integrity of the profession, the duty, the responsibility? What else do you highlight?
Well, I've added 15 new appendices to the book, and Well, the first of those actually focuses on what is known as the Olive Cook saga, and it identifies in quite some detail what went wrong then and why this is still a threat. The second of the appendices is one of the best case histories that I know of, which is probably one of the most famous case histories around the world, which is a story of a small charity for adults with mental handicaps in Yorkshire. I started fundraising with them in the early 1980s, so we've been doing it for more than 40 years. And so the part of that case history that I've focused on in relationship fundraising is a thing that we introduced with them called continuous donor choice, which is that with every communication with your supporters, you give them the choice to decide what they want to hear from the charity, what they want to hear about, how often, in what format. And donors have reacted fantastically positively to this opportunity to control the communications they receive from the charity. It takes some organizing, it takes some doing, but they reward the charity with gift averages to die for and donor loyalty. So I've focused on a few new subjects. I've updated the bequest section, the legacy marketing section. I've focused on donor loyalty, which is a hugely important subject. Biggest thing, I think, is probably culture, because I believe that the culture of fundraising is much more important than strategies. All fundraising organizations devote a great deal of attention to their strategy, rightly so. But strategy is about what we want and how we're going to get it. Culture is about who we are and what underpins what we believe, what our character is as organizations. And I think that's where we need not-for-profit leadership to focus on, is how we change the culture so that our supporters see us in a different light. And getting that message, there's another area where I feel I've not been as successful as I would have liked. Fundraisers go to conferences, and at conferences they talk about relationship fundraising, and they all profess to be relationship fundraisers. I actually found a quotation from Roger Craver, who wrote a book called Retention Fundraising, which focuses on retention. I'm on the relationships, he's on the retention. So I think we're two sides of the same coin. But Roger made a kind of flippant, very light-hearted comment, but it's a very true one. He said, relationship fundraising is like teenage sex. Everyone talks about it. Nobody really knows how to do it. Everyone thinks everyone else is doing it. So everyone claims that they are doing it too. Now, that I think is scarily true in our sector. But as far as boards, trustees, chief executives, senior management teams are concerned outside the fundraising sector, I don't think they've engaged with this discussion at all. They're seeing fundraising. And part of the reason for this is the term that we use to describe what we do. Fundraising. It sounds as if we're just about money.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a shame. And that's why I wrote the book, which you referred to, The Essence of Campaigning Fundraising, because I believe there's always a campaigning element to any request for funds. And donors, they certainly don't want things to stay the same. They give us money because they want to see change. They don't give us money to help us reach our targets. They don't give us money
No.
so that we can better in the annual report than we did last year. They give us money for a very specific campaigning difference. And I wish we had built that into our description of what we do. The other factor, Tammy, which we haven't really touched on, is that poor retention of donors is mirrored by our poor retention of fundraisers. And again, Penelope Burke has written a lot about this, and she's researched it, as she always does, with great vigor and integrity. And she has, I think she quotes in North America something like 16 months as the average tenure in post. In the UK, it's reputed to be about 18 months. Again, these figures might well change a little bit here and there, but it's nowhere near enough. And I think we've got to focus as part of our culture, in retaining fundraisers for the long term. So at least they have a chance to put longer term strategies into place in their organization. Because unquestionably, relationship fundraising is a long term activity.
Yes. Just to quote Penelope Burke again, I heard her speak at a conference and she was illuminating the average tenure of a development professional, a fundraiser. And she said, what's interesting, if you look at, to your point, the trajectory of how long a fundraiser stays in that position with an organization, which is 16 to 18 months, depending on where you are. And that essentially a donor on average is with you for 2 years before they have enough trust to give you their most generous gift.
Right.
And so to your point, when those two marks miss one another, we introduce a new fundraiser.
We miss that generous gift. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's so obvious when you think about it. Fundraising depends on trust and confidence. It's absolutely essential. People are not going to give you a significant gift. And what's significant is different for each person. And to me, each significant gift is of equal value to the giver because they're significant to them.
Yes. Yeah. Relative to their means and circumstances.
Yeah, of course, we'd rather have somebody give us millions of dollars like your major donors in your past. I know about, Tammy. But, of course, that makes a difference to us. But really, from the donor's point of view, it's rather like the widow's mite. We should treat every donor as significant, valued, and important. And I have to say, I don't think as yet we do. But there you go. I really think there's a job to be done with the other people in the senior management team and on the trustee boards. The trouble is the ones who get it are the ones who will come to a fundraising conference or they come to an event and, they get it. And so they perhaps don't need it so much. It's the ones who don't come that we've failed to reach. It would be very good if we centrally could promote some of these things. If like the likes of AFP or the Chartered Institute of Fundraising in the UK or other professional bodies that represent fundraisers could package this message and get it out more widely. It shouldn't take well past his sell-by date retired individual like me to be telling people how to do this. It's a good job. I enjoy it.
And Ken, I think it needs to give yes, the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, yes, AFP, yes, organizations of fundraisers and marketers. But I think we need to go even beyond that. We need the board source. We need these other organizations that influence, that help inform our boards, our executive leadership. Because I've seen, of course, people who come to the conferences, they get very excited and they get some nuggets to go home and implement. But I've seen just as many who come to conferences or they'll listen to you on this podcast or they will pick up a copy of your new book and they'll pour through it. And when they go to implement, they hit barriers inside their organization, right?
Yeah, of course they do. But we need to elevate the importance of this activity because there's so much that we can do. And I think, one of the things that I'm quite proud about is that people tell me, I've been apologizing to people about the size of relationship fundraising. It's gone up by 50% because I've added new content. And I hear back from people saying, but it's still very readable and it's very accessible. I think that we have a task, we have a job to do, which is to make the subject interesting so that those people that we've not succeeded in reaching, we can reach them. And I think we need to get very much better at doing that. But we can because it's a great story. And I always say to people, we've got the best stories in the world to tell. We have also another area which I've put in one of the appendices is the art and craft of storytelling, which has shot up the agenda of fundraisers around the world. And this is a fantastic thing. We have, in terms of influencing people and inspiring people, we have got the best stories to tell. And we can tell those in such a way as to make people think, help them to appreciate, take them into the lives of other people that they care about and to show them through our creative storytelling that they can achieve such a lot. And, again, I think that's part of the communications challenge. And in essence, relationship fundraising is all about communication and how we keep in contact with people without making them feel that every time we write to them, we're asking them for money. Very often, we're giving them a lot through our communications as much as we expect them to give to us. And then you find that donors' own momentum gets behind the giving process. And if you put the donor in the driving seat, they will happily keep in contact.
Yes, put them in the driver's seat and ask them where is it they want to go.
Yes. Let me tell you a story, which is actually a story from my former business partner, Alan Clayton. He was working with an organization in Australia based in Melbourne, and they had a donor whose name was Marjorie. And she gave a substantial amount. They did their due diligence and analyzed their donor records, and they found that Marjorie was giving to them on an annual basis. Every year, she would give them, for her, a substantial amount of money. So they contacted her and they said, we're going to send you a direct debit form, which is like an EFT, electronic funds transfer payment, so that you don't have to renew this gift every year. And there was a silence at the end of the phone, and Marjorie was upset. And it was noticeable. You could tell in her voice that she was upset. And she said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to sign an automatic mandate to my bank. I look forward to our conversation every year that I have with you and your colleagues. And they tell me all sorts of things. And that's why I'm proud and happy to be giving you money. And, it took the organization a while to appreciate they weren't doing this particular donor and probably many of their other donors a favor by automating the process. And, that's one of my fears about the coming of AI is that I'm not 100% confident that you can take the human touch out of fundraising. I'm not sure that automating what we do is always going to be the right way. So it's just something to think about.
And certainly I'm a believer that the power of AI to automate a lot of the back end processes is absolutely the right thing to do. To take the fundraiser and the relationship out of it is absolutely the wrong thing to do. Like that will not get us where we want to go.
Yeah, I'm fully with you on that, Tammy.
Nathan Chappelle, who is really a leading voice in this whole responsible AI movement for fundraisers, he has such a powerful quote. He says, AI will not replace fundraisers, but fundraisers who use AI will replace those who don't.
That's a good one. I like that. Yeah, that's imaginative. I've got a piece in the new book about the coming of AI. And, the predictions for it are, if we handle it correctly, are quite benign. The potential that it offers us is huge. And, I really think we should be embracing new technology. And we don't always. We're certainly never in the forefront of embracing it. But I think it will be good. I used to say to all my clients, they would always invariably ask me the same question when we were talking about a new fundraising tactic or strategy or plan or whatever. And they would say, will this work for me? And I always gave them the same answer. I would always say, it will work if you do it properly. And they would kind of look at me and sort of think, well, obviously I'm going to do it properly. And then they would go away and come back maybe a year later and say, you told me that was going to work. I tried it and it didn't. And I would then have to remind them, actually, I said, it will work if you do it properly, and you didn't do it properly. And they kind of then get quite upset. We have to manage these processes, and we have to do it as fundraisers, not as marketers. I would love to see us drop the marketing handle. We have to do it in a way that reflects the unique relationship that there is between a cause and its supporters. And that is so valuable to us. And yet we kind of don't remind ourselves about it. We override it. We don't really listen. So many of our organizations don't really listen.
There's this knowing doing gap. Even if we learn something new and we know we should do it. Like, yes, I should pick up the phone. I should thank donors. I know we should update our donor communication. I know I should call and schedule some visits with key donors or longtime donors, loyal donors. And yet we jump into the river and then we hit the rapids, and there's just so much to do that we end
Yes.
up doing what we've always done, and it doesn't serve us.
And you're right, that's sort of almost part of the human condition, but it doesn't need to be like that. And we need to have a strategy for all of these things.
We do. Absolutely. And I'm a big believer in really looking at what are you doing that is effective or could even be scaled or be
Mm.
more effective? And what are you doing because you've always done it, whether it's an event, and I'm not anti-events, but I want you to have a few events that are strategic. Or are there initiatives that just are not producing results, aren't deepening relationship? Then you need to create a stop doing list.
Yeah, and that's right. Yeah. And that will free you up the time to do other things.
Yeah.
But above all, we need to listen to our supporters.
Yes. Quality relationships, which could even mean smaller portfolios, so that we can listen to our donors, deepen those relationships, and continue that partnership for the long haul. I
Yeah.
think that's really what relationship fundraising is all
Yes.
about.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think that donors generally have unrealistic expectations. They will. I learned this lesson in my very first fundraising job with ActionAid. We went out to our supporters. We used to hold regional meetings on a Saturday for supporters to come to, and the staff would volunteer. They didn't get paid. They would come on those meet the supporters days, and we would go to different centers around the country, and we had plenty of volunteers who people, staff members absolutely loved listening to them. But we would always ask them, what do you think about XYZ issue, mainly to do with international development and aid and how that was perceived and so on. And invariably, the supporters would say, well, we trust you. We trust you to do the right thing. But they loved the fact that we were asking them. And that, I think, is something that, again, organizations need to, so they shouldn't say, well, when we ask our supporters, they don't ever suggest anything that's very useful. A, that's not my experience. I think very often they do suggest things that are useful. But B, just the process of asking can be quite positive.
I love it. Ken, thank you. Thank you for joining today. Thank you for writing the third edition of this really, truly transformational book. It can potentially be intimidating to read cover to cover. It's also a wonderful reference book.
There is an index, and I don't really expect people to consume this great meal that I've provided for them in one sitting. I think they will mostly dip into it. But I am surprised. Actually, Tammy, I'll tell you a story. I have a great friend of mine. He used to be the head of fundraising. He's retired now, for one of the very biggest of the British not-for-profit organizations. And he said to me, I've got your new book and I'm reading it again and I'm really enjoying it. And I thought, that's great. I was actually quite impressed because he'd got it rather sooner than most people were getting it. I got an email from him yesterday. He said, I feel such a fool. What I had done was, he said, I'd ordered your book online, and then I found what I now realize was the second edition. And he said, I've been reading the wrong book. And he has now got the actual third edition, and he's settled down to read that too. So I thought that was dedication above and beyond what I could have expected.
Indeed. I love that story.
That's nice.
Ken, at the end of each episode, I like to ask a few rapid fire, insightful questions to provide even more value for our listeners. Your game?
I am game.
All right. First question. What's the best fundraising advice you've ever received?
That's a very good question. I have to say, Tammy, I was very fortunate in that when I joined this tiny little organization, it wasn't even called ActionAid then. It had been started by the guy who started Oxfam. And in fact, I worked closely with him for the last 2 years of his life, a guy called Cecil Cole. But one of the trustees, one of the board members, that I reported to was a guy called Harold Sumption, who founded the International Fundraising Congress in Holland. And Harold was a relationship fundraiser long before the term was ever in use. And I got such a lot of fantastic advice from him. And I've actually put some of the sort of bon mots, the good words from Harold Sumption, is now part of what's called the 34 Fabulous Fundraising Foundations, which is in my new book, which is on the Sophie website, free of charge for anybody to go to. And it contains 34 fabulous pieces of advice. Probably more than half of them I got from Harold Sumption. And he said to me things like, talk to people where they are, not where you want them to be. And his motivation for that was that the supporters of Oxfam in its early days in the UK tended to be typical donors. So they were older, comparatively affluent, well-educated people. And the staff at Oxfam were young, impoverished, because they didn't get well paid at all, and tended to be left of center and so on. And so his advice was to say, you're talking to people to support your work who are possibly not like you. So talk to people where they are, not where you want them to be. And that always struck me as important. You need to understand your audience and you need to talk to them in their language. So that was one thing. Another one of his was people give to people, not to strategies or plans or papers or research documents or special schemes. So I would have plenty of good fundraising advice that I could draw on. The advice that I give to people now is I talk about the truth told well, which I think is our imperative. I wish that was our slogan, because I think we have to be honest, decent, legal, truthful, but we also have to be incredibly skilled how we present our stories. And the final bit of advice I got from my business partner, Alan Clayton, who I mentioned. And he said, I really rather like 10-word slogan, and none of these words has more than 2 letters. And the slogan is, if it is to be, it is up to me. That is actually the pitch that I would like to make to fundraisers now who see the potential that there could be in our fundraising and who are prepared to put themselves on the line to make it happen. And I don't see why they shouldn't, because, we need to reinvent fundraising once again.
Yes. Yes. And now for a final word from our sponsor.
Every fundraiser knows that the secret to success lies in creating authentic connections. This starts with data, but that data needs to turn into insights that inspire action, which in turn fosters generosity and long-term donor relationships. Kindsight's fundraising intelligence solution lets any nonprofit do just that at any scale, with the world's largest proprietary donor database, AI-powered content generation, an award-winning CRM built specifically for fundraising teams, and much more. Go to kindsight.io to see it in action.
Ken, what book do you recommend to our audience and why?
Well, I should recommend the book we've just been talking about. No, I
Yes.
couldn't possibly do that. I tell you what, I think we're in for a treat, because there's just about to be published in Canada by Civil Sector Press is Lisa Sargent's first book, which is called Thankology. I know this is a good book because Lisa asked me to write the foreword for it, which I have done. And so if you just buy it for the foreword, it's great. No, but actually the book is fantastic. And I love the name that she's given to it, which is Thankology. And it means, we have an ology. We are scientists. The art and science of saying thank you properly. And there's no better guide to that than Lisa Sargent. She's wonderful.
And she's agreed to come on the podcast as well. So our listeners will be hearing from her before too long.
I think you're in for a treat. She's well worth listening to. There are loads of good books around. There are still loads, Retention Fundraising by Roger Craver, I mentioned earlier. Anything by Harvey McKinnon,
Yeah. And while you didn't recommend your own book, I recommend Relationship Fundraising, 3rd edition. It's brilliant, whether you're reading it cover to cover or whether you are using it to delve in on specific subject matter. I know it's a book that will have well-worn pages over the course of your career. All right, next question, Ken. What are the 3 most important traits a successful fundraiser must possess?
Wow. Okay. I think there's a lot of traits. Being a fundraiser is actually a really quite challenging role. It's very fulfilling because it does call for a whole host of personal human qualities, and the opportunities for creativity and innovation actually abound in fundraising. If you are confident and articulate and well motivated, but also you want to make a difference in the world, better opportunities than fundraising. But I would think, in terms of just naming 3, I would put integrity very high. And one of the things that was painfully absent during the Olive Cook saga that I mentioned earlier was a lack of integrity. And we get so much in our politicians where integrity has just gone out the window. And I think this gives such a bad example. And I have heard business people say to me, oh, well, things like that don't matter anymore. They really matter to our supporters. And if you don't have integrity as part of your culture, that will show. I think fundraisers have to be tenacious. I think they need to be in it for the long haul, and they need to kind of put themselves second. The third thing I would mention is commitment to the cause and commitment to your supporters. I tell the story in relationship fundraising about a young fundraiser being shown the ropes by an older fundraiser. And the question was asked, what's the most important thing for a fundraiser? And the old fundraiser says, commitment. Mere involvement is not enough. You have to be really committed. But the young fundraiser, he says, I don't get the difference. What's the difference between involvement and commitment? And the old fundraiser says, the difference between involvement and commitment is the difference between bacon and eggs. In bacon and eggs, the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. And I quite like that. So that's, there are not many fundraising jokes.
And that's a good
And
one.
that's one of them. Yeah. And the other thing, actually, sorry, well, just while I think of it, likability. I've sat on so many panels recruiting fundraising leaders, and I come out of them at the end and say, and everybody says, oh, that person, what a very impressive CV, or, look at what they've done. And I say, I would never put that guy in front of my donors because he's just not likable. Sorry, that sounds very harsh, but if you're not likable, you're not really going to do well as a fundraiser. And so somebody who's got that character, magnetism, personality, I think likability has to be quite high.
Love those. Now, Ken, I might get you in trouble here because I know you have spoken at conferences probably on every continent. If you had to choose, what is your all-time favorite conference and why?
Whoa, unless I'm speaking, I don't go to conferences now, which is terrible. I used to enjoy going to conferences. Unquestionably, my favorite is the International Fundraising Congress, which is held in Holland each year. But I haven't been for about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. But I did present there for 18 consecutive years. And I think, you get to the point where you think, oh, blimey, him again. So I haven't been back. It's a great conference. It's truly international. It's a lot of the INGOs, the international charities, hold their staff retreat around the time of that conference. So they will coincide and they bring people from different parts of the world. It's not the cheapest event around, but I think it is the best. It used to put on a very spectacular show, but more than anything, it focused on the people who had something other fundraisers might want. And the atmosphere in it was absolutely electric. And you would get people walking tall because they were mixing with fellow fundraisers. And very often fundraising, particularly in a small organization, can be quite an isolating activity. And it's great. So I've been to NSFRE, AFP conference, I've been to a whole host. PBS conference is one of my favorites. I've done that twice. There are plenty of great conferences around, and I do recommend that people invest the time and without necessarily anything other than the ability to meet and interact and listen and learn. I've picked up some of my best thinking and ideas at conferences because I'm a little bit of a magpie and I absorb what I hear. Everybody thinks that I know a lot. I don't know a lot. I just born.
We're back to listening again, aren't we? Listening.
Exactly.
Yeah. Ken, knowing what you know now about fundraising, what advice would you give your younger self just getting started in the profession?
Right. Okay, that's a beautiful question. What if I'm walking along the corridor and I meet my younger self walking towards me, just, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, about to start on day one of my new first fundraising job? I think I would say to him, that callow young fellow, I would say, focus on the donor experience. I firmly believe giving is voluntary. If giving is a good experience, donors will do more of it. If it isn't, they'll soon stop. That is the blindingly obvious, but it's also the core of what we need to do to allow fundraising to achieve its full potential. And that calls for reinvention. In all my career, and all my books are about reinventing fundraising. I've absolutely loved my career as a fundraiser. It's taken me to places and let me work with and meet people. It's been a fantastic experience, and I've tried to capture some of that.
So here's the last one, Ken. If you could host a fundraising dinner with any three historical figures known for their philanthropy, who would you invite and what unique fundraising tactic would you try out on them?
Wow. Okay. Harvey McKinnon wrote a book a little while ago, and I think I've got it on my bookshelf, which is called The Healthy Nonprofit. And in it, there is quotable quotes on a whole variety of subjects. And I used this to write about leadership because there are some really wise things have been said. But you talk about the three people I would invite to dinner party. I might invite three of the people mentioned in Harvey's book. That is Gandhi, Aristotle, and the Buddha, who are all great men, unfortunately. But I would tell them that in Harvey's book, one single individual has more quotes quoted than all of those three put together. And that single individual is Dolly Parton. So I would love to get them round to dinner anyway, but I'd love to tell them that. But maybe the real answer would be, if you go on the Sophie website and you look at the history of fundraising, which is something most fundraisers just are in terrible ignorance of. They don't know what great fundraising has gone before them. The first recorded fundraising campaign comes from 3,500 years ago, and it's Moses with the children of Israel wandering in the deserts, and they decide that they need to create a portable altar, which is called a tabernacle. And all this is documented in the Christian Bible and in the Old Testament, actually, of course. And their campaign was so successful. People donated jewels and clothing and artifacts as well as money. And it was so successful that actually Moses had to return quite a lot of the gifts that they were given.
Exceeded goal.
Exceeded the goal. And I think for the first recorded, and I'm sure there probably was fundraising before then, but it's the first one that I know of. I think that's a marvelous thing. There's also the story of King David, who had held the first major donor dinner, at which he raised money for a temple in memory of his son Solomon. And he raised the extraordinary sum in today's value of about $460 million, which is quite extraordinary. And the people who attended that major donor dinner are quite interesting. And also a story in Sophie about Pliny the Younger, who was a very remarkable person. And he created the first matching funds appeal for a school in Como in Italy. And again, did pretty well at it. So I would quite like to have them round my dinner table, but I wouldn't be telling them about fundraising tactics. I would just be listening to see what I could learn from them.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us, Ken. Always a delight.
It's been a pleasure, Tammy.
If you want to learn more about Ken Burnett, relationship fundraising, Sophie, or any of the other resources we've discussed today, check out the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Intentional Fundraiser podcast, and keep on transforming your fundraising so you can transform the world. Bye for now. The Intentional Fundraiser podcast is a Fundraising Transformed original. It's hosted by me, Tammy Zonker, founder and president of Fundraising Transformed, where we help equip and empower fundraisers, nonprofit leaders, and board members to transform their fundraising so they can transform the world. Visit fundraisingtransform.com/podcast to subscribe to this podcast and subscribe to my newsletter to get fundraising lessons, tools, and helpful resources delivered straight to your inbox each month. If you want my help with taking your fundraising to the next level, become a member of my Fundraising Transformers community as a growth member and join me live each month where I'll teach you the same strategies I use to lead, train, and coach thousands of nonprofits, social service organizations, healthcare foundations, private schools, colleges, and universities to collectively raise more than $500 million. Including a single gift of $27.1 million. As a member, you can participate in my Ask Me Anything sessions every month and get answers to your burning questions. Chat with other growth members inside our private and safe online community about what you're working on, struggling with, and share lessons learned. And get instant access to my growing library of on-demand self-paced training classes. New content is added every single month. Learn more about becoming a member at fundraisingtransform.com/growth. Talk soon.